Hey class, hopefully you are doing quite well right now. This is the instructional video for our next lab, our lab 2 on heart rate. And this actually has two separate videos to it. This video where I'm kind of explaining the document a little bit more, and then there's a secondary video where I'm actually demonstrating a little bit of the test with a little bit of voiceover with that. So please watch both videos before you get started. And here, let's just go and get into this. So what you're going to turn in. This lab is a little bit different. I'm not requiring you to take a video of yourself. However, you most certainly can, and you can cut the video, all kinds of stuff that you would like to do. All of that would work perfectly fine for me. But if you don't take a video of yourself, you have to submit a series of photos illustrating every separate part of the test. Really try to convince me with a series of photos that you actually did perform the test. If you didn't, I will. If you didn't do a very good job of convincing, I will take off points. So that's one thing that you're going to turn in. Another thing is just the worksheet at the very back end. This is kind of how I like to do these things. What you will turn in, lab 2, all of that type of stuff. That's how that goes. Okay, so now let's start talking about this. Heart rate. Heart rate is a very interesting variable. It's probably one of the most simple variables and one of the most telling variables that we can use to see how somebody is doing, how hard they're working, all kinds of things like that related to exercise and physiology. So first off, let's talk about resting heart rate because you're going to need to measure that in this lab, and I'll get down to the specifics about how to do that. But generally, an individual with a lower resting heart rate on average is so-called healthier, or at least their cardiovascular system is more adaptive, more responsive, more fit than an individual with a higher resting heart rate. And here, this is just a quote I pulled from a paper that I found years ago. Read that if you wish. Next few things, heart rate versus pulse. Really the big thing, heart rate. We're going to be expressing this in beats per minute, so BPM. If you ever see that, that's what that means. I think everyone's heard of bradycardia and tachycardia before. Um, Next thing to talk about is steady state. So we are going to be exercising, and whenever we're taking heart rate, your heart rate is pretty indicative of how hard you're actually working. It goes from it responds to light levels of exercise with only a small increase from your normal heart rate to very high heart rate whenever we do really intense exercise. Now, the type of exercise we're going to be doing is going to be relatively constant anaerobic, so we should be able to achieve what's called a steady state or an aerobic steady state, meaning that we're effectively meeting our energy demands aerobically and our body isn't at a homeostatic level. However, it can meet the energy demand without kind of undue stress on the totality of the system. So within that, I do want you to read this. I'm just going to tell you the big points really quick. Normally individuals have like a really low resting heart rate, partially due to greater parasympathetic control onto the vagus nerve, meaning that really our body is leaning more towards rest and digest versus fight or flight whenever we're just being going through normal everyday life where we're not stressed out too much. And typically our heart is said to be in a more parasympathetic state if it's below 100 beats per minute, and it's in a more sympathetic state if it's over 100 beats per minute. So hopefully that makes sense. There is some neurophysiology going on there that I'm not really going to get into at the moment. But one of the reasons, another one of the reasons why we can have such a low resting heart rate for athletic or healthy individuals is because the left ventricle actually expands the stroke volume. The amount of blood pumped per beat expands quite a bit to where we don't need to have such frequent contractions whenever we're transporting, oxygen and glucose and various other nutrients to our peripheral tissues, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Two other things that are really important to know is your heart rate response to exercise. The faster it reaches a steady state, meaning that it goes above your baseline and then stays constant. So hopefully we're going to get to some steady states here. It typically takes an individual about 3 minutes to get there, sometimes up to 5 minutes. But the faster an individual gets to a steady state, that really means that their cardiovascular system is more fit or more responsive and healthy in a way. And next thing, heart rate recovery, which we will also be measuring in this, is after we cease physical activity or exercising, the faster it drops or reaches a baseline or it comes back to your baseline, your resting heart rate, that is another really good indication of how healthy one's cardiovascular system is. So hopefully you can see the application for all of this, like how responsive an individual is to stress and how quickly an individual deals with metabolic byproducts after a stressful event. So that's really everything that's going on here. Now, with the equipment that we need, we just need a metronome, a stopwatch, some type of device to take your heart rate. Now, you can certainly palpate. Right here, I have explained how you palpate. So typically, you either do the radial or the carotid pulse, and you count for a given period of time. Typically 15 seconds is what many people do. The American College of Sports Medicine actually recommends to do it for 30 seconds and then just multiply it by 2. But a lot of individuals will, just take it for 15 seconds, multiply it by 4, and that's perfectly fine if you want to do it that way. Now, if you are palpating, one thing that a lot of individuals don't know is that very first beat that you feel, say with the beginning of 15 seconds, that first beat is not 1, it's 0. So whenever you put your fingers on your carotid pulse and you feel that, the first one is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. As you can tell, my heart rate's somewhat elevated because I'm talking at the moment. But you can palpate, you can use a particular device, watch. If you have a heart rate monitor for whatever reason, you can certainly use that. I have noticed that those are somewhat inaccurate the higher the heart rates go. However, I have seen some devices that work amazing whenever I compare them to a polar heart rate monitor. It really just depends on what you have. One thing here, a free app that you could download if you have an iPhone or whatever. This is actually something that I use all the time. It's the Instant Heart Rate app. You really just put your finger over the camera of your phone, and it takes it really well, and it takes it at really high heart rates as well. I get my heart rate up to like the 180s very frequently, and it seems to get it pretty accurate whenever I compare it to a polar. Another thing that you're going to need is something stable to step up on. And in the video that I make, you can see that I stacked up some weights I have laying around, and I was stepping on those. It needs to equate about 16.25 inches. It doesn't need to be exactly that, but it needs to be pretty close. As close as you can get to that height. But that's really all that we're going to need for this lab. So, the procedures. First thing that we need to do is determine your resting heart rate. And you're going to need to put that in and remember it for future labs because I'm going to ask you about it. It's going to come up in a lot of calculations that we do later on. So, you'll need to wake up on 3 separate mornings, so this is going to take a few days, after hopefully a good night of sleep, and take your heart rate right whenever you wake up in the morning. And we need 3 days, and we need to average those days. Next thing, we're going to have our baseline, and exercise and recovery protocol. So this is what we're going to be doing. So baseline, you're going to be taking your heart rate for 5 minutes. You're going to take it every single minute on the minute. Then after that, you're going to turn on your metronome, which of course you can, just use a computer for, or your phone, whatever you want to use for a metronome, just something that clicks on time and that you can set the beats per minute. But for the first light exercise, this needs to be 18 steps per minute, and you'll get to see this in the video. So I set the metronome to 72 because we multiply that by 4, because you're going to go up with your right foot, up with your left foot, down with your right foot, down with your left foot, then up with your left foot, up with your right foot, down, down. So up, up, down, down, up, up, down, down. That's typically how these protocols work. Then for our first recovery, you're going to take your heart rate every minute on the minute during recovery. So just sit down on something. You can sit down on the box that you're stepping up on. So hopefully we'll see that dip down. And then intense exercise. So for the next 5 minutes, you will be stepping up onto the box at a faster rate. So this is 24 steps per minute, so the metronome will be set at 96 beats. So measuring your heart rate every minute on the minute, and hey, it's going to be kind of hard to do it. You might need somebody with you that you can, take your heart rate and yell at them what your heart rate is, yelling over the metronome because they can get quite loud. And then recovery, last 5 minutes, just measuring your recovery. So it's going to end up looking just like this, what I want you to end up turning in. So the first 5 minutes right here, well, I guess actually, I do want you to insert what your resting heart rate. I do want you to put that in there too. Average from the days previously. So with this, the baseline, 5 minutes. So you're going to take your heart rate every single minute. Then light exercise, at the 72, the 18 steps per minute. And then recovery 1, intense exercise, that's the metronome set in 96, and then recover for your last 5 minutes. From that, you're going to make a line graph from this. So have, time on the x-axis, and then your heart rate, connecting all of these different dots on the y-axis, so we can see how this is happening. And then I want you to respond to a few of these questions, just thinking about how your heart rate responded to these different intensities and what's happening in the recovery periods and everything like that. And really, that is about it for this lab. Relatively simple. I really just want you to video it, take pictures of it, and do it, and take note of how your heart is actually responding to all these things. All right, and as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.